This content is brought to you by Fisher Improvement Technologies Online, a learning platform that includes self-paced courses, knowledge sharing, and networking opportunities for safety, quality, and performance improvement professionals. Join now for free at online.improvewithfit.com.
This show is brought to you by Safety FM.
Over 25 years helping leaders reducing errors and incidents. Here is your host of the Essential Leadership Cycle podcast, Rob Fisher.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another round of the Essential Leadership Cycle podcast. I'm your host and intentional leader, Rob Fisher. And today we have a real treat from down under. Good friend and colleague, Damien Neal, is safety manager at a large oil refinery down there. And Damien is chosen to give us some time today. We want to talk a little bit about how they've used the Essential Leadership Cycle. They deployed Arrow over the last year or so, and I'm excited to have Damien on. Damien, welcome. Tell our folks a little bit about you and what you do down there in Australia.
G'day, Rob. Very good. I'm very pleased to be here too. So I've been in safety for about 25 years. I've worked for some great employers. I've worked for a chemical industry. I've worked for a heavy manufacturing industry, and now I'm with an oil refinery for about the last 3. And I think we met maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I was working for Alcoa at
Geelong.
that time.
Yeah.
And for me, that was, they were a really strong performing business. From a safety point of view, we had really good safety performance. In fact, we had a lot of organisations who would try to benchmark and come and talk to us about some of our safety initiatives, really strong safety systems. And this was pre-human performance. So, I felt as though that we were doing well, but it always felt as though that we were missing something a little bit, that we had sort of stagnated in terms of improved performance, in terms of where our frequency rate, if you want to measure that as a metric, and it did seem like the human performance was the salt on the steak, if you know what I mean, in terms of what it had given us. So I look back on those days as a bit of a light bulb moment, and in fact I listened to the podcast with Jeff Shockey that you had, and that was that reminded me, of a lot of the stuff that he did. He really did pioneer a lot of stuff, didn't he, for a lot of organisations, particularly, so many thousand kilometres away down here. We're still working on some of the things that you and Jeff worked on.
Yeah, I mean, it was great to talk to Jeff again. We stay in touch, and he's enjoying his retirement. But I don't think a lot of people know how far his reach was and how amazing his vision was for where these attributes of understanding human success and human failure could really take us. I was doing it because I felt like that people needed to understand what we knew about human performance, but his ability to work that into the industry was amazing.
Oh yeah, it was. It really gave us a process which I think helped with the deployment, so it would stick. I think if there was anything that, and it gave me the confidence of introducing Aero to where I am now. I'll talk about that. But if there was any confidence that I got from that time of the integration of human performance, was that there was very much a roadmap, and that if you followed the roadmap, and you need to go back a few steps sometimes, it might be that you take 2 steps forward and then you might say, we haven't quite nailed it, but you absolutely got confidence that it would become part of the way that you did business. Well, providing you had your leaders there.
Yeah, exactly. And if you remember, we wouldn't move unless we got the leaders there. So sometimes they would, they'd try and fool you a little bit. But that part hasn't changed, even with deploying advanced error reduction now. That part about, and I think that was one of the things that we enjoyed developing, was that path. And it was funny. I was also talking. You may remember Mike Brooks. I was talking to Mike Brooks, and and he was reminding me that when they went around, they would tell the plants, they would say, listen, now they have this path and you ought to follow it. Now, if you follow it and it screws up, it's their fault. But if you don't follow it and it doesn't work, it's going to be your fault.
Yeah. Yes. And we in Australia, we probably got the rollout came a little later for North America. We got some benefits out of being a little bit later,
Yeah.
because we got to see what are some of the things that got rolled out, and we learnt from some of the mistakes, which you do anywhere in any organization. You get that benefit, but it was really clear. This is the path. You still need to customize it because you've got cultural things that you're going to engage with your personnel. So it wasn't like it was so prescriptive that you couldn't move, but it was have the faith that these are the steps and you'll get there, and not to be too, I suppose, in a hurry, that you needed to be at a certain place at a certain time if you followed the process. So, and that's been true for our experience here.
Yeah.
If I think of how we started to talk to the integration here at Viva Energy, we really, and you and I had multiple conversations, and I'm sure you remember, around getting our leaders comfortable with, so what are we signing up for exactly? What will this mean for us? And it took your good fortune to say, how about I come down, and actually do some face-to-face things, which really crystallized the moment for a lot of our leaders. For sure.
Yeah, I also think they liked that we weren't trying to push them into a whole process until they understood what it would do for them and how they could think differently. And I think a lot of organizations think that you're trying to push them down this process regardless of what they think or what they know. And I think that the whole organization became a lot more comfortable when we sat down and said, here's the delta, the differences between what you know and what is known out there. And so here's try and use it. And I distinctly remember, we're on the Essential Leadership Cycle podcast. I distinctly remember that the Essential Leadership Cycle was a big piece of that with your organization, right? Because they used it as a tool.
Yeah. It definitely was. And, I think that, from thinking about a shared vision and values, we were struggling a little bit with where we were as a business and where we were as an organization, because we were going through a fair bit of change at that time. And while the organization talked about what their values were as an organization, which a lot of organizations do, was it necessarily shared with all our employees? Well, it wasn't at that point in time, So I think that as we engaged and talked more with our people, and I think the discussion around what we believed we needed to do versus what we were able to do. And one of the things that I do remember clearly was us having that discussion around when we have those people engagements with our people in the field that allocate time to have those value-based discussions. And this was even when we were in the concept of, well, do we even do this or not? That I remember you sharing that with us, and we were sort of doing that. And what I mean by that is we were allocating time to say, put time in your calendar to go out in the field and have a conversation. But having a conversation and turning that into potentially an audit, and identifying things that are going right and things that could potentially being done a little bit better, versus having a engagement which is really trying to evaluate those values of the organization versus the work that's being done from the work of that. That's a different type of engagement.
It is, and it was. I remember the meeting at the restaurant, and we were talking. So that was almost second round. That was let's get a little bit more solidified. And the managers were saying, well, what do you want us to do? What should we do? And we started talking about values-based engagements and going out and having these. And I remember about half the room said, yeah, okay, I can go out and talk about those, because they didn't like doing observations and audits anyway. And the other half thought, well, how am I going to check the box on the auditor assessment if I'm just going out and talking to people? So it was funny how the e-colors that day really kind of revealed themselves in what people wanted to do versus what they needed to do. So having that 50% marker and saying, look, just make about half of your time in the field engaging over the values. That's where your self and team awareness come from. Do I really know if we share these values and we share these visions? And from the feedback that I got later on, those were some pretty fruitful discussions, but I'll let you talk about that, about your feelings of some of the things that came out of those discussions and engagements.
Yeah, I think I think taking the interactions that we have with people, so that and we've done something pretty simple. There's no rocket science to it, but there's one thing to have asking our leaders to have some of those value-based engagements. But then you can be in there's a checkbox, because there is, to say that people have done it, because we like to be able to see, we schedule so many, our leaders getting out and doing that, and it's up to them to put their detail in, and they'll sort of complete it. And we've used some guides to some prompts that people can ask. But the real value for us is that as a leadership team weekly, we ask one of the leaders to share their engagement back with the group. So they talk about what their engagement looked like. And there's been some gold that's come out of that feedback. And what it does for the group, and we've got an extended leadership team, so there might be 30 people on the call, is I know that is part the person showing when they're doing the share that they've wanted to share the engagement and maybe the pride that they have in the workers who have performed the work that they didn't anticipate what they had done in terms of maybe applying some of our Aero principles, particularly if they've applied the tools well, and then being able to share that back with the work group. There's a real education moment for a number of our leaders in that as well, and you can see it in the room, and it's not often said, but the people who hear that feedback, that if it's a really good example of that value-based engagement, and that it's that positive reinforcement that they've given to that small group of workers, even though that's one manager that's done that with a small group of workers, feeding that back to the people in the room, that you take it on saying, maybe I could do mine better. Maybe my engagement could be more along those lines. So we've found that to be a powerful way to keep it live. So rather than sort of set and forget, yes, we've got a value-based engagement process that people go out and have those conversations, and we test how well things are running and recognize where they're not, and actually take something away where we see there's a mismatch, where we see that things aren't being performed because the system isn't allowing that work to be done. That takeaway is, what do I need to do to this to demonstrate this conversation was more than me just coming back and ticking a box?
Yeah, that mismatch, what you rarely find if you really look, is that mismatch is because this was a group of workers that wanted to be mismatched. It's usually, this is a group of workers that we have a mismatch. And, when we talk to the first line supervisor, they're interpreting these things that we're telling them. And, oh, by the way, we haven't told them everything. So they're having to make interpretations that then get down to the field. And we're watching that unfold in front of us, instead of waiting on an incident and then trying to back it up and saying, well, you misinterpreted that mission, vision, value, goal, system, whatever.
That's been important for us. I think the other thing, which I'm doing a little bit of reflection here, Rob, because we haven't had a chat about this, but another moment that probably stands out for me, and I'm thinking essential leadership cycle, was really when we were thinking around that self and team awareness. And I was used to human performance, and we were at the rollout stage, and we were talking about a full aero rollout and what these E colors meant. And I remember saying to you, could we roll it out without the E colors, Rob? And you had sort of said, hey, listen, this has really enhanced it. What E colors has brought to human performance, that yes, you can, but I would say that the benefit that you get in understanding people having a better appreciation of themselves and their teammates really adds so much. And I have to say, it has significantly, it's helped with engagement. It's helped with people connect with Aero. So the human performance principles speak for themselves, the way that they work, and because there's a little bit of it that makes sense, even though that applying some of the concepts can be a little bit counterintuitive. But the e-colors get to people straight away, not only for what they see in themselves, but also in their work colleagues, that they say, I knew that about. Yeah, now I know. Now I know
why.
I can see that in you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it was funny, some of the early meetings that we had, and we brought some of the workforce members in. There was this real belief from some of the leaders that this isn't going to take, you may be able to sucker us in, but you're not going to get, the workforce isn't going to believe this. They're not going to get bucketed in there. And we had this first big meeting, and I think some of the leaders just looked, well, okay, because they were talking about not just communication, but how they see and manage risk differently. That's the big key. Yeah, and I know that about you. And one of the things I know about you as a fellow colleague is that we manage risk completely differently. And now we can manage it to the betterment of that task.
Yeah.
And
for sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that we're probably at that stage of our integration that we are starting to recognize, even though there's a recognition within the teams, and we do a fair bit of displaying our e-colors within our work group. We haven't made it mandatory, but a lot of the guys either they will know within their own work group, but there are some work groups who display them pretty easily. We're at that stage of integration that as we're doing our pre-task brief and making assessment, there is a greater recognition of the e-color combinations within the team. And that is starting to see, I think, an appreciation of not just some of the attributes, but as you just mentioned, some of the way that we might see risk. And that's been a little tricky for us. And what I mean by that is that we've really wanted to be clear to our people that we don't want to typecast somebody because you're a top color red, you're a risk taker. That because it's easy to do that and it's lazy to do that. But what we do want to do is have that discussion around who might be better in that work group to be. We've done a startup here, and a lot of our startup has a real step-by-step checklist approach to the way that we start up a unit. We've learned that tool, it serves us really well. Step one, here's what it is, verify that it's done, check it off, and our top color greens gravitate to that really quickly. They're the people who will sort of be really clear with being able to do that. So person with the checklist versus the person who's implementing the tool, recognizing the color combinations in the team so that match of work activity and strength work well together is something that probably landed anyway without e-colors, but now they're having the conversation about it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And look, you're not having to push people to do it either. They're doing it because they feel it helps them. It was just something that you provided, as opposed to you will do this and
for sure.
I one of the things that I recall from early on was some of our conversations with myself and you and a couple of the senior leaders about, look, all you have to do is show that you're willing to use models and you're willing to use processes. And then if you actually visibly use those models and processes, then the field will model that behavior. But if you resist using things like the Essential Leadership Cycle podcast, then the field will resist the tools that you give them as well.
No, absolutely. We know that, and everybody needs a little refresher, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
That I think that bringing people back to some of those core principles is important. We're probably 18 months, coming up 2 years. And it'd be closer to 2 years before we first started our rollout, and we probably did a bit of a soft launch with regards to it was actually around this time 2 years ago, I'm thinking, because we did this launch in November and then we had a bit of a time off and then recommenced it with a full sort of rollout in that January time.
Well, it was funny because we were going to do the phase one, phase to launch and very prescriptive. It was going to be this group. And the next thing you knew, you had 4 groups coming to you saying, okay, but we're next.
Yeah. Oh, 100% we did. Yeah. We had such an overwhelming, that I really took, there was some impatience by me because I had this lived experience of living in an organization who had got to level 4 of human performance in terms of that integration over a 10-year period, and it was really mature. And then where I am in Australia, that part of Alcoa shut down, and we had a lot of people, and I'm in a regional city, about 250,000 people, and you would see people who we'd all left the organisation, and I was working up the road in Melbourne, and I would see people who would bump into me on the street, and they would say, I'm the safety guy. They would recognise me from there. So that was, what are you doing now? Was the first start of the conversation, and we were all doing different things. And almost without exception, they would say, yeah, you know what I miss? I wish the organisation I had now had human performance. So I try to educate the guys. I try to talk them about performance modes, but I can only do so much.
Right.
And that's the guy who's the worker on the floor, who's an influencer, and he can do a lot within a small group. I have to say that I felt the same going to another industry where I would look at their safety systems, and their safety systems were solid and strong and reliable, but it didn't have that human performance element. It did not have some of those fundamental concepts of, this person, this task, this time, this language that you've developed. And I would feel, and I had more influence over a safety management system being in charge of it, but without everybody being educated, without everybody understanding that, I would feel as though that my influence was, okay, so how do I build this appreciation of what these concepts are so that you can call upon them? And it was really difficult that I felt a little bit like, gee, this is going to be tough for me working in an organization. And I potentially saw that as my reality for a little period, that maybe I'm not going to be able to have that again unless we fully engage and fully commit to saying we're going to do a full integration. So in coming to Viva, and Viva were looking for really a safety differently approach. There was a bit of discussion about generative safety culture, and there was some understanding of James Reason's sort of teachings, but that they knew that I had experience with this, and the conversation around what it could look like. The appetite was there. Now at that stage, for me, I'm like, well, let's go. I'm top color red. I'm ready
Done.
to go. Sign me up.
If you're waiting on me, you're backing up.
But not everyone's like that. So we had our CEO who pleasingly and this is a little bit of hindsight. At the time, I didn't feel great about it. Was sort of pressing pause on it a little bit. Wanted to understand a little bit more, and again, I think a bit of an aha moment when you said, "Listen, how about I come out and I pitch to the guys," because I had done my best, and I think that, and we'd done some audio stuff. The crystallizing moment I think we had. We invited all our union guys. Again, your recommendation, which I think was a great recommendation. Get your union guys in there with your leaders so that if you're going to get buy-in, they're bought in early. And I wasn't present for the meeting afterwards. Obviously, I was for that delivery. But there was a catch-up with our president of the union here, and he caught up with our CEO, and they were talking all things refining, all things regarding EBA and so on. And he said, if you don't bring in aero, it'll be the worst thing that you ever do. If you don't bring it in. So for him, it was like, right. And he said, but don't half do it.
Yeah.
Don't do it the way that you think that it could be done and not to what I've just heard. Because if you fully commit to it, and I have to say there was a little bit of, that's great, but you've got to fully commit to it too, So there was this, are we all in? Are we both all in?
Yeah.
And,
the union guys came up after that and said, our biggest fear is that we'll want to go all in and the organization will want to do it halfway.
Yeah.
And we just hear that so often. And you think to yourself, what other process out there? What other thing that you try to bring into an organization out there? Do you have the people on the floor saying our biggest fear is that we won't get the full benefit from this? I just don't see that a lot, except for these concepts.
Yeah.
Because the way you portray it and the way you guys continually portrayed it is, we're not trying to force you to do something. This is not something you're doing for the company. We're giving you something to help protect you. Now, the company gets protected because we get better quality. We get better safety numbers. But you win because you and all of your colleagues get to use this anytime you want to use it. And the fact that they come up to you, weeks, months later after they've moved off into another environment and say it's one of the things they missed is a real testament to what you've done.
Oh, yeah. And I think that I think one of the reasons that there's some skepticism is that organisations continue to, and I've lived it. I've said how long I've been in safety. I've seen programs that I'll say in inverted comma come in and then they get launched and there's energy and the energy stays for a period of time. But as soon as maybe that person who launched that program leaves the organisation or changes role, the energy goes down, and then it doesn't get followed through with, and then it sort of dies. And the posters might remain on the wall, and the procedures or the templates might stay, but that program isn't there anymore. That actually builds from, I suppose, a trust from the employees about the commitment that the organisation has. So what's next? Is this the next big thing? So I understand the skepticism of having. I'm not going to be. Yeah, I'm super excited because I know this is going to be successful, and you guys are going to do it really well. There is a little bit of let's see. I want it to be successful, but gee, please commit to it. Please show us that you're really going to do this and do this justice.
And I don't see a negative in that anywhere.
Yeah.
Because that's your check and balance system, right? And who's going to win is going to be the right person. So, for instance, if management says, well, we're not going to be all in, we're going to do a 100-person pilot, and we're going to take 2021 to do the 100-person pilot, then the signal that sends to everybody else is this may be just like everything else. But if you say we're going to phase this in, we're going to do the senior leaders, then the managers, we're going to test with some advocates and get y'all some info in the field, And before we fully deploy, we're going to do those 3 things that we know would set us up for success if we decided we were going to. That trust they start to see that it's being done a little bit different than things have been done in the past, and that trust builds pretty quickly.
Yes.
One
and I think I was going to say, I think the not seeing it as a separate exercise to your existing systems and processes. It starts that way because it's new. So the thought of it is, oh, this is new. So we've got Aero sits somewhere. And then I think after you do the deployment, and I'm thinking of deployment as once you've trained the majority of your people, then that starts to become the way that you do business. So, that your pre-start meetings now look differently. The way that you engage people in the field looks differently. The way that you do incident investigation looks differently. And it's not just that it looks and sounds different, but people can give you tangible feedback about how that has made the process better. That being able to give people an opportunity to call out a situation and use a common language is really powerful. It's so much more powerful having been away from it and then coming back to it, and I described that journey of my employment to coming back and then seeing people to say, I think we're in knowledge-based performance mode, rather than, and anybody can say it and they don't, that sentence crystal gets everybody on the same page. Right. Yeah, you're right. We are. So then we need, let's stop and seek out help. Again, another sentence that people can say universally. That group understands that completely and what that means. You take that language away and then ask somebody who thinks to himself, I'm not sure we know what we're doing here. We should probably go and get some help. But having the courage to have that conversation. Yeah, that's right. That's right. It becomes an opinion-based discussion.
Yeah.
It takes that opinion-based discussion away because we've learned this, that we recognize that the benefit that we get out of this is going to outweigh the inconvenience, is going to outweigh the potential time delay. I think that one of the ways we've tried to really put that values-based organization from an Aero perspective is that really early that we rewarded and recognized stop and seek out help. And that was a takeaway that, and we redefined it. So, and what I mean by that is that most people think, we're used to stop. We'll stop things. And you have to sort of go through that education. I'm not saying if you see someone on a roof without a harness and lanyard, everyone will stop that. This threshold is a lot lower. And we've just described that moment of, I think doesn't sound like we know what that next step is. That's a much lower threshold to stop and seek out help. And yes, that might have an impact on your ability to get that job done on time. It might or it may not. You'll probably save the time from the errors that you were going to make. But in that initial moment, for you to take that step and say that you're going to stop, and for our leaders to say at every level, we want you to recognize and have a stop of the week. At every week, we want you to look to your work group and say, what was the best stop of the week, and recognize. And it's small. It's a coffee voucher. Once a month, what's the best stop of the month that we had? At our town hall, we call out the person who's had the stop of the month. We spin the wheel. It's a little cheesy, but it gets everybody involved, and they recognize that what was the stop of the month. What we're really saying to the organization from a values perspective, we don't just say we want you to stop if you're unsure. We actually reward it. It's so important to us that we want to recognize that as being something that's well done, because if you don't, then it feels like it's lip service. And I really feel as though that's had a big impact on us in terms of showing, having shared values, that it's more important to stop than it is for you to think that I'm going to do the right thing and I'm going to get this job done on time.
Well, and that really takes it from empowering to enabling. I mean, empowering is the organization say, hey, we want you to do this, and we're giving you the power to do it, so you can't say that we're not supporting it. Enabling is saying, listen, we're going to give you all the tools. We're going to integrate those tools into your day-to-day workflow with you. We're going to make them work for you and for us. And then we're going to reward the behaviors around using those tools. I just think that so many organizations stop at thinking empowering is enough, and they never move that. Just kind of going back to something you said before, it's the whole process of education, integration, and sustainability, not just training.
Correct.
And that's where you get the benefits from. So I got one more question on the essential leadership cycle, and we haven't talked about this, but have you guys been using the power of the difference between the driving elements and the resultant conditions? And how's that helped with understanding that self and team awareness, shared vision and values, clear roles and processes, those are the drivers of everything. And all the rest of them are the results. So, don't try and pinpoint the results. Try and pinpoint the driving element that leads to those results. How are you guys dealing with that? You've been using it for a couple of years now.
Yeah, I would say our leaders from our leadership team that we have here at the refinery and our extended leadership team have really tried to look at how we look at the work that we have planned and the way that we present to our organisation, and probably working in that sort of top quadrant, I suppose, of self and team awareness, shared vision and values, and clarity of roles and processes. And what we've tried to do, I suppose, rightly or wrongly, is give a different leader, I suppose, a custody of that process with a view of how are we deploying
what a great
that.
idea.
How is this playing out in the way that we engage our people, the way that we operate as a team? And we've probably started with our own leadership team in the first instance. How are we presenting, and how does this model work for us? The way that we are deploying it, I suppose, or living it, not so much a deployment, I suppose the way that we are living it with the rest of the organisation, I would say, Rob, is still taking shape for us in terms of where it is in terms of our maturity.
But that's the great thing, that it's a cycle. So it allows you to take that shape. And I love what you've done with almost giving leadership stewards to the critical attributes or the driving elements. And then, you go look for the challenges in the resultant conditions. But the fact that it's a cycle says that we're going to continually evolve this over time. And we're never, some people don't like this, but you're never going to get there. Yes. You're going to get to the next spot that you can evolve to. And that's a learning organization, any way you cut the cake.
Yes. And interestingly, we've had a change of manager. We got a new general manager for refinery, and he's new to the organisation. He's done his aero training, and in fact, it was one of the things that he had said after we first met: when do I get my aero training? Which was fantastic. It wasn't like there was a push to say, hey, you really need to get on board with this. This is something we've been doing for a period of time. He'd done his e-colours. He'd already had a bit of a discussion with the outgoing general manager who'd taken on a more senior role. So he'd got a nice background around about where we were in terms of maturity and deployment. And he has quickly adopted got an understanding of where we are with aero. And I think even what that does to your essential leadership cycle, it puts it doesn't change things, but in terms of clarity of roles and responsibilities and somebody's new vision, there could be potential turbulence with that. As that was changing, I was thinking to myself, I wonder how this will go.
It usually is, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Because
Wow.
the questions that you have around, this is how we've operated, and this is how, even from simple as a safety person and saying, that our role is to support the business. We're the right-hand person to our manufacturing operations. If something goes wrong, here's how we'll help you through it, as opposed to sort of an old school of, safety looks after those things. There's been an incident, they do the investigation, they do the follow-up, and they tell us what we need to do. That can completely change the dynamic of the way that you are structured, and there needs to be a rethink around clarity of roles and responsibilities. It hasn't been, pleasingly for me, that it's been an adoption and I love what you've done, but as you've said, we're still on this journey, so it doesn't stay the same. It doesn't mean that we're continuing to do the same things. Yeah.
Well, Damien, is there any question or anything you think I should have asked you that I didn't, or anything that you want to talk about that we haven't talked about?
I don't think so, Rob. I see where we are at. I mean, I suppose the questions that I've got in myself are probably where's the next challenge for us in terms of being able to be through a successful deployment. We're at we're reassigning some of our team to be able to set up the steering committee for Aero. We can see the benefit that it's got. I'm excited for the future. I'm just as excited as I was when we started, because when I look towards a new year, I don't look at it like, gee, so what do I need to, I know the improvement that we've got to make, but I don't think what do I need to dust off that's shiny and new. Yeah. It's really around continuing to deploy what we've done, but also bring in the new in terms of what are the next challenges for us. So for somebody who's been doing this for a period of time, and still be excited about what we've got to do and educate our workforce on those principles. I feel as though that we're really grounded, which is terrific. And I don't think you've missed a question, Rob. I think it's been a good chat.
It has been a good chat. And we'll talk offline about some of those things, because we've got a lot of stuff going on. So I look forward, now that the shutdown's over, reconnecting a little bit in the next few weeks and just chatting about what's going on. Well, Damien, Neal, thank you very much for coming on. Really super appreciate you coming on and sharing with everybody. And you can get more information on this. We'll publish this in the next couple of weeks. I've been your host and intentional leader, Rob Fisher. Thanks for joining us.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the host and its guest and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the company. Examples of analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based only on very limited and dated open source information. Assumptions made within this analysis are not reflective of the position of the company. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast, Jay Allen.